Identify and explain the reasons why the Northern Ireland Assembly has produced relatively so little legislation. One reason for the lack of specific Northern Ireland produced legislation emerging from the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive is that since the Good Friday Agreement to the present, the Assembly and the Executive have been suspended on 4 separate occasions, including a period of 4.5 years between October 2002 and March 2007. The issues of decommissioning of terrorist weapons and power sharing with Sinn Féin dominated much of the period, and as a consequence, the stop-start process was not conducive to the business of legislating. Added to this, the Northern Ireland Assembly operates with a 5-party coalition and a government where many of the parties are diametrically opposed to each other. Given that there are possible legislative difficulties in Britain between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats over things such as tuition fees and the minimum wage and our position within Europe, it is hardly surprising that getting 5 parties to agree to legislation in Northern Ireland has proved very difficult. According to Alex Kane, commentator with the newsletter and former Director of Communications for the Ulster Unionist Party, during the period between 1998 and 2009, only one distinct piece of legislation was passed. In other words, one piece of legislation that would not have been passed had Northern Ireland been subject to direct rule. All other legislation essentially amounted to rubber stamping UK or Westminster laws. One of the reasons for this is the vast amount of legislative initiatives have to emerge from the executive. Given the animosity between the DUP and Sinn Féin, particularly over the standoff on policing and justice linked to disarmament and new conditions set by the St Andrews Agreement, which allowed any 3 executive ministers to block the legislative proposal of a minister, the deal to stop the so-called solo runs, the opportunity to block or hold up legislation is both a strong one and an effective one. The classic example of legislation being blocked is that of the Education Bill, which has not progressed beyond committee stage. The bill was designed to save money by combining the various education boards and SEA into the Educational Skills Authority. Our teacher, Mr Fuzzy, for instance, was invited to the New Year's Day party at SEA to welcome the birth of Isa in 2010. He is still waiting to toast the new body. In a recent Stormont Today report, Jim Wells, chair of the Health Committee, pointed out that the current rule that all bills have to clear committee within 30 days is unrealistic, and that they need an extra 10 weeks to complete the complex task of hearing witnesses and amendments in order to do their job. This links to the fact that one of the strengths of the Northern Ireland Assembly was to give committees considerable influence in the legislation process, and that unlike Britain, where the government dominated and run to a very short timetable, the Northern Ireland Assembly is a deliberative process, and in addition there's a tendency for the committees to behave more like party bodies than legislative bodies, and thus members regularly slow down the progress of legislation if it goes against their party preferences. A final reason why legislation has not seen the light of day relates to the bills being put forward outside the executive by backbench MLAs. There are 6 of these currently at the first stage, and to date not one private member's bill has gained royal assent. When the Northern Ireland Assembly was set up, it was claimed that this type of legislation would be commonplace. The fact is, however, that without the support of the main parties and the resources necessary to push such bills, time and legal expertise, such legislation, as in the case of Westminster, rarely does anything or goes anywhere and does little more than raise an issue, such as Dawn Purvis's bill to prevent any extension to the Belfast City Airport runway.